It's been 10 minutes, right? Go ahead and start. We got a lot to cover. I want to make sure everybody's out here by 7 o'clock tonight. So, you want to get on earlier than that? The humor, my jokes aren't that funny, or you're not that funny people, one or the other. Must be my jokes. They're bad, aren't they? I try to get some new material for my next. I'll do a better job with the BI user group meeting. I'm more comfortable. Not that I'm already not nervous enough talking to a bunch of DBAs, and then my Azure portal goes down on me. No, that's the test tenant. Okay, so it looks like things are back up. Just to cover back on a couple of things here. I wanted to show you the firewall rules. There's a couple of views, one for firewall rules at the server level, and then one for database firewall rules at the database level. So Dan was already in here, but how they're stored is basically ranges with a name. There's a stored procedure you can use to create those. If you come back into the database portal, that's where you would set these up. You can only set them, one thing that's interesting is you only set them up at the database level inside by using the store procedure. If you set them up inside of the actual portal here, they're always going to be at the server level. So right here, the set firewall rules, that's going to bring you back to the server level and then allow you to, basically it'll see what your client IP is currently, and you can always add that. So, whenever you're on your hotspot and you're trying to get to your DB and SSMS, okay, well, don't just use the default 4-node IP range, right? Because it's going to change 10 seconds from now, and you're going to be redoing it again, right? The one other thing that I thought was interesting, I didn't get to show, is on this guy that I have the auto tuning set on. Right, if I come down to my recommendations here, this is where I just wanted to show you that this did apply some indexes for me, and then that top one there, it applied it reviewed for a period of time what happened, and then of course it's not like I was running it a lot, but you can see here that it actually, it ran that SQL statement again, and then when it ran again, it performed worse than it had performed without the index, so it automatically reverted that index for me. This isn't getting hit very much, so it would take some time to go through that process, but that's the intention, is that at least with index tuning, it'll be smart about it, and we'll revert one back if it doesn't work. The other thing that I was struggling with my portal that I think all of you would be very interested in is the automation scripts. So if you're not familiar with Azure, there's a couple, well, PowerShell, yeah, there's a bunch of PowerShell commands that can be used. But there's something called an ARM template, okay, Azure Resource Manager. And what Azure is you can see how things come in and out. Like every time I click on a button, a new blade comes in, and then I click on a button and another blade comes in. Well, it's cool because you can actually set up ARM templates to create your own blades inside the portal. And what that template is basically just a bunch of properties for what you're setting up. So for instance, for these databases that I set up, now this is, if I come down here to like taxi data small, I'm seeing here, this is that resource. Sorry. Right, this is that resource right here that I created, and now I basically have the script for creating that resource in the way that I want to create it. So I can now take this, use that ARM template later on in some sort of automated PowerShell script or whatever I want to call it from. This is then what can even be used in the portal. If you have something internal to your organization that this is your standard that you want to use, then you can just have a link for that. It'll open that particular blade up in the portal and just allow them to go with any configuration options you give them, or just create it automatically. So this is kind of neat. The automation script area shows you the different PowerShell and the CLI .NET code to create all those resources. Okay, let's talk about elastic pools. Current slide. Maybe. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. All right, so here we go. All right, multi-tenant applications. Who deals with multi-tenant applications? Anybody have multi-tenant environments? Not very many. Okay, you just deal with. Okay, so you know, there's a few different scenarios in deploying a multi-tenant environment, right? And this is basically the simplicity slide of, you know, whenever you're doing single tenant, you know, well, managing single tenants at scale, total cost of ownership in a multi-tenancy scenario is you know, hard. When you do true multi-tenancies, then, you know, implementing and doing isolation security is hard, as well as customizing, right? So you have certain fields that one client wants that another client doesn't want. So with Elastic Database Pools, again, there's trade-offs with everything. I don't know that it's just all hunky-dory like it is there, but this is the idea that I can have lots of little databases for each individual client, and then manage that in an Elastic Database Pool. Or what I see some clients doing is, I don't know, sometimes architectures have the actual database name written into the code like, you know, 10,000 times, and trying to re-architect that database name from being called data warehouse to something else is a daunting task, right? So what's really cool with Elastic Database Pools is I can set up a pool that has maybe the 4 databases that have that hard-coded name in it inside of an Elastic Database Pool. So, and that pool basically is defining a resource level, all right, for each one of those customers, right? So if I have those 3 hard-coded names, put them all in a single pool, and then I have a resource level that I can use for all of them, but I don't have to re-architect my code to, you know, to make those names not hard-coded, right? Working with the customer right now on that, actually, because guess what? If I have a bunch of small customers and I have that in my code, if I have to stand up a whole new SQL Server instance for every single customer, then, you know, so I can get the same database name, that's kind of a pain. So the idea here is I can just assign resources across all of them. So instead of DTUs, now we have eDTUs, right? So what does the E stand for? Elastic, right? So the cost per drink here is a little higher, right? Because now we're allowing you, which, you know, Dan spun up his premium tier, you know, $400 a month database. Well, now we're saying, you know, if I just have different resource usages across maybe 5 or 10 databases, I can put them all into one Elastic pool and then be able to, you know, split that up. Well, it's going to cost more than $400 to do 10 databases to get the same performance. But, you know, again, this is all that idea of, you know, critical mass. As long as I'm moving more than, you know, one database to the cloud, this is something that's good to take advantage of. All right, so let me come in here and just show you that real quick. So I think if you saw in my blade, I had a question when I created the database if I wanted to assign it to an Elastic Database Pool. I didn't. So what you can do on the Elastic Pools is if I created this one, you can come back later and configure the pool. And then here it's showing me, you know, the databases that are currently assigned inside of that single pool. I can add databases from here, and I can also scale my pool resources. And then this is just showing me, as long as my level, as long as I don't have multiple databases that are peaking, you know, at the same time and hitting 100% DTU at the same time, it's a nice way to, so as you can see, one's pretty active, the other one's pretty much baseline scale. But here the pool eDTU is something that I can scale up, and notice how much, you know, less, you know, DTU that my scenario would have. But just again, remember, the base level 50 eDTU is $75 a month, okay? So I can get a standard S0 database for $15 a month for one database. As soon as I want to go to a database, Elastic Database Pool, I'm paying $75 a month, okay? But at least now I can spread that over 10, 20, 30 databases. And then again, as far as looking at the big picture on Elastic Database Pools, there's also an OMS template for Elastic Pools instead of just database. So this is where it will manage my Elastic Pools from the log analytics, just like I was showing you before on the database. Now I only have one, right? I don't have 5 individual databases like I did over here, right? But over here now I could say I have multiple pools that I'm managing. Again, what's that word? Sean Nestor's word, hyper-scaling your DBAs to handle not just 1,000 individual databases, but now they're able to handle 100 Elastic pools, and they can see which ones are the bad actors and the bad performers there, drill into the one that's a problem, and then drill all the way into the underlying database if you need to. Thumbs up, thumbs down, impressive, not impressive. Somebody's a thumb, okay, got one, all right. Cool. We'll come back up here. Oh, we're good. All right, what's next here? Again, you can scale this to where you're isolated. You can define these parameters for your pool instead of your individual database. All right. Works in your development environment. Do you want to do this? You just want to come back and do the backup initial?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So, popular languages. So if you're working with on-premises solutions, think about SSMS. You're probably not updating that on a monthly basis. You might even have a version that's like 2 years old by now. As soon as you start working with Azure, I can't emphasize enough to keep your tools updated. Make sure you're working with your administrators to allow you to get more frequent updates because your life just gets easier. You can connect to Azure SQL databases from SSMS of 2 years ago, but you're not going to have near the capabilities that you have now. And then the other thing is we're just really trying to be cross-platform with all of this stuff. So as much as we can, we're making different tooling options to meet you where you're at with how you're managing stuff. Anything here?
Yeah, this again, unspecialized.
Yeah. And then, the only thing too is just remember, is me coming from the developer ranks, right? As a developer, I don't care about all that underlying stuff. I don't care about the database until it starts performing poorly, right? I just care about, can I use the tools I want to get, to the things I need. So, again, whether it's on Windows or whether it's Linux, whether it's across, SQL Server, DB, or even our MPP appliance in the cloud, should be able to use all of these different options to connect to those.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this slide that I like is a lot of the client level APIs. We all know about ADO.NET, I hope, .NET connectivity, JDBC, OTC, and the like. But there's also a lot of open source ones that are really coming of age. And some of these languages, like platforms, I should say, like Node.js, for example, are becoming very popular. And, for their SQL connectivity, it's nice to have either a driver that Microsoft supplies or one that's supported by the open source community. So there's really a lot of activity in the ecosystem to be able to support this connectivity SQL, but at the end of the day, it's going to boil down to TDS, which is really the protocol that all client APIs talk to SQL Server. So I just think that's really neat the way the world's changing. It's not just Microsoft's way or nobody. It's really becoming very open.
All right. Any questions on connectivity? No? All right. So here. All right. So we'll talk about business continuity. I'll go ahead and go through a couple of these security slides as well, and then we'll do replication, restore, backup, restore. So business continuity, 4.9's availability. Do you guys do SLAs on your own environments? How many of you have customers you have to manage a 4.9 SLA? Anybody? Yeah, I know a couple of you probably do. But that's hard, right? I mean, that's not an easy thing to achieve. 3.9s is one thing, 4.9s is more. So we'll talk about geo-replication and all the business continuity things. Here's the other part of it, though, is when it comes to compliances, this isn't Microsoft that owns these compliances. This is a shared compliance between Microsoft and the tenant. But our list of what we're compliant to from a security perspective is, I doubt anybody in the room probably has an environment that they're as compliant as we are on all these. Now, you don't have to if you're not in Europe or whatever. You don't have to care about a lot of these, but we do. We have clients everywhere. We want to make sure that you're comfortable. If you're in healthcare, we do BAAs. So we follow HIPAA, high trust. All of those are available inside of Azure. So when it comes to security, an ISO standards, 27018's, PII data in the cloud. So when it comes to compliances and security, it really comes down to what we do support, the compliances, what do you need on top of that to move. Because a lot of times you'll see the benefit, right? Then you're fighting the battle of, security doesn't want us to, wants everything in our data center. So just let Microsoft know, find your Microsoft contact if that's me or somebody else in your space. But we talk to security all the time. We have these conversations, and when they realize what we do in our environment, what our data centers, our physical security, our data centers are, we start, changing some minds, right? So it's a long process. So if you want to use Azure SQL at your workplace, then it's just something to consider bringing security in very early. So we can start having those conversations to work through the blockers, because it's not a fast process. As soon as your CISO gets involved, it takes a while, but the compliances are there. And then the one other thing I'll add on this is just when it comes to the maturity of this platform, there's multiple cloud vendors now, right? You got AWS, you have Azure, and you have Google Cloud Platform, right? AWS was the first of the game, but they really focused on infrastructure as a service for a long time. So, infrastructure-wise, they're a couple of years ahead of where, Azure was. We're trying to, catch up, with what their capabilities were. But when it comes to platform as a service, we were really the first ones in this idea of trying to make things at a higher level, abstract up from just the OS level. And so, there's nothing on the market that's as mature as SQL database from, a database tier service. So you are getting, pretty much the best one on the market. All right, so let's look at continuity. All right, so if I come back into my database, one thing I can do, I think this is probably my last question. Is anybody using Always On currently? A few of you? Okay. So this is the easy button for Always On for geo-replication. This is, I don't know, I'm more of a BI person, visuals and, slice and dice, and that's all fun to me. And I always used to give the Eddie Hendricks hard time because I was like, this is the only visually appealing thing you can do in a SQL Server demo. Everything else is SSMS and code. And watch, it's probably not going to work on me now. I can't even do it. But yeah, being able to set up geo-replication, select the geo-replication, let's see. That's probably not even going to let me do it. You're going to have to set up geo-replication through T-SQL now. I think you can add that to your list of to-dos.
I don't have a demo for that.
Yeah.
Just at a high level, compared to how it's on, it's going to go there.
Yeah.
It's really multi-site, failover, always on. Get about multiple regions on it.
That's my, let me come to my other one. Let's try it one more time. Go to my virtual machine here. I had that up before. So let's go to SQL DB. Okay. loading. So this basically allows you, it'll show you all the data centers available when it comes up. And then I can basically go from like this database is currently in the East Coast data center. I can right click on the West Coast data center, enable geo-replication, and it'll go ahead and start replicating my data over to that data center real time, right? And then I can add multiple if I want to do it to Asia or wherever else as well. I can just do it through the portal and make it happen. Too bad it's a fun demo. Yeah, I'd probably do it from Chrome or something, but I think it's just the availability of that right now. But anyway, it's definitely available. And then what I think Dan's going to talk more about is backup and restore. So restore is very easy. Restore to is it 5 minute, I think 5 minute increments, incremental restore. So yeah, it's very capable. And so why don't we go ahead and do the backup and restore piece, and we can come back to this.
Ready?
What do you think, Hughes?
If you want, I can jump over to my portal and see if I have. Yes.
Nope. There you go. Just for things.
All right, I have a couple databases that you saw earlier. Just one that's just a real small demo database, nothing special about it. But I just want to see if I can click on the geo-replication here, if I have the same problem or not. Yeah, no joy. But anyway, if I want to restore this database, well, actually I have a couple of slides that I probably should introduce first. Let me go ahead and do that.
It's up there.
I have a different deck here. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I just have a couple of slides here just for some, talking points before I actually, do the demo of the backup. Backup is automatic in Azure. Matter of fact, there is no way to back up a database in T-SQL or restore a database in T-SQL like you might be familiar with. So don't be scared. The backup is automatic and it's always there. But even more importantly is the recover from the backup. And as a seasoned DBA, let me share a quick story. When I was, I guess I've been using SQL for a couple of years. This was back in the SQL 6.5 days. And we had a rollout of an application. So I took a backup right before it, anticipating the worst. I was being a good Boy Scout, So I wanted to be prepared. So I took the backup, and then I let the developer do the rollout. And of course, as luck would have it, things went south. The database, was upgraded successfully, but the code doesn't work, so we had to roll back the database changes. So I figured, fine, no problem, I'll just restore from the backup. Opened up Enterprise Manager, because it was in the old days. Tried to do the restore, I got an error restoring tape, as luck would have it. Tried an older backup, same exact problem. Well, it turned out that there was actually a bug in that SQL Server version, 6.5, that was fixed in Service Pack 1. So I applied Service Pack 1, and I was able to restore the database. But I felt like somebody dumped a cold, bucket of water over my head when that database wasn't restoring, because the users would have lost a whole day of work. So the lesson learned here, even in the Azure world, is to test your recovery plan, not just rely on backup. So it's always a good idea to test your actual, recovery. But that being said, you're going to get, full backups every week. You're going to get transaction log backups, differentials every hour, transaction log backups every 5 minutes. So therefore, you're going to have a 5-minute RPO for point-in-time recovery guaranteed. Additionally, there's automatic geo-replication of the full and differential backups, which you don't really have direct control over, but they're going to be out there to recover in the case of a disaster. I'm not aware of a disaster that's happened in a cloud provider yet, but it's bound to happen at some point. So, for example, if the data center gets destroyed for some reason, or more likely, some storage administrator is going to accidentally push the big red button and destroy all the disk in the data center. And, you need to still account for the fact that if you have an application, you might have to actually restore to a different data center or a different region. And that's the benefit of the geo-replication. The geo-replicated backups, I should say. Optionally, if you need to have, I'll speak to this in a minute, but you can also restore or store backups for long-term retention in the Azure Recovery Services Vault, which I believe is still in preview, if I'm not mistaken, but it'll be coming soon for general use. Again, there's no such thing as a backup or restore command in the Azure world. Everything is done by either the portal, PowerShell, or REST API. The time it takes to restore a database, as you can see there, is going to depend on mostly how much work you did, and how big the database is. So it can take some time to restore in a database in Azure, and usually that's going to be longer than what you're accustomed to on-prem. But fortunately, backup isn't or restore, I should say, isn't the typical thing you do all the time. But just be advised that it might take a little bit longer. And it's going to be affected by the number of concurrent users that are also restoring backups at the time. So think about the worst case scenario of an outage where you have to restore to a different data center. I suggest that you be ready to pull the trigger and do your restores, because it's going to be first come, first serve. You want to be first in line. So be prepared for the worst. So here's the recovery capabilities by tier. They're pretty much identical, with the exception of the basic tier, which only gives you 7 days of point-in-time recovery. So in the basic tier, I can restore guaranteed pretty much any point in time within the last 7 days from backup. And in the standard and premium tier, it's 35 days. So that's over a month of point-in-time recovery capability, and that means you can recover any point within those time ranges. The estimated recovery time, or ERT, from a geo backup is quite a bit longer, and the RPO is within an hour, as you can see on the slide. So it depends where you're backing up or where you're restoring to, et cetera, because with the geo restore, you can also restore to a different region. So if you're restoring from a geo backup that happens to be in Asia and you're restoring to the United States, that might take quite a bit longer. So I think everybody knows most of your DBAs, what point-in-time restore is. But in the Azure world, there's a couple additional considerations. First of all, when you do a point-in-time restore, you can change the service tier performance level during the restore, which is nice. Something I don't think, well, I guess you kind of can sort of do it with an on-prem database if restoring to a different server. However, in the Azure world, you have to restore the database for a point in time, mind you, to the same logical server, and importantly, it has to have a different name. So in other words, your database already exists, and you're restoring from a point in time backup. So you have to first restore it to a different name. If your intent is to restore and replace the database, you would also have to then drop the original database and then rename the database back to the original name. It's a little bit hokey, but it kind of makes sense when you think about it. That way, when you have to restore, some cases you may want to just restore an individual table, like if somebody did a delete without the where clause, well, you restore it side by side and then recover the data with an insert select statement. But in cases where, the database is absolutely totally, hosed because of a failed deployment or something like that, then you can restore. It's just that you have to remember to drop and drop and rename the database afterwards. An important note, though, is that you don't want to drop the database before the restore, because the database has to exist to be able to do that point-in-time restore. So, so don't forget about that. So don't drop the database until you really want to drop it. At the end of the day, that's a lot different than on-prem. So that's a gotcha. So something you don't want to learn that one the hard way, because once you drop the database, you can't do point-in-time recovery anymore. The backup, the point-in-time backups aren't going to be available. Although you may be able to contact Microsoft support, they might be able to help you out, but I wouldn't count on that in the day-to-day operation. However, if you do delete the database, you can still recover, basically from, database backups. It's just that you do it a little bit differently. When you recover the database or restore the database, it has to be done to the same logical server. And the database name, if you want to, can be renamed, or it can be the same name as the original. Since that database doesn't exist, there won't be any conflict. But as soon as you, I should say, if you delete the logical server, you're also going to lose your deleted database backups too. So be careful with that big red button when you delete a logical server, because that's going to take away all the databases and all the backups with it. So be careful with that one. Geo restore, as I mentioned, is backups that are also replicated to a different region, which you don't normally have control over, I don't believe. However, you can restore from them. Now, restoring from a geo backup is a little bit more flexible in the sense that you can restore it to a different server, a different logical server. You can also, like you can with the other ones, change the, the tier and the scale and the process. Let's see. And you do it a little bit differently depending on whether or not you're doing it through the portal or from script. I don't know if you noticed it, but in the portal, when you create a new database, you can say from backup. That from backup can be a geo backup, and it's kind of transparent to you as a portal user if it is or not. But when you create the new database, you're really standing up a brand new database when you restore from geo backup for all practical purposes. There's things that you still, if you're restoring from a geo backup, and you need to think about the firewall rules and things like that. So always be prepared to recreate your logical server firewall rules and things. There's nothing automatic within Azure that's going to save that stuff for you. So if you're an advocate of source control like I am, I would actually store my SQL scripts I use to create firewall rules in source control, or at least keep it for safekeeping. And same thing with the login, the logins and things like that. At least for non-contained users. So with that, let me go ahead and jump over to the portal here. All right. Well, if you want to, you can do before.
Just exit notification.
All right. You want to do your GeoJet? Okay, I'll let you jump in afterwards. As luck would have it, the GeoRep demo's over, and now it's working perfectly.
I had a question.
Yes.
So what options have
So the question is there an option to restore from Azure back to on-prem if we want to? The answer is not directly, but essentially it would be reversing the process of taking an on-prem database and moving it to Azure, which would be, as hopefully we'll have time to get into, maybe perhaps creating a backpack, from the Azure database. So it would be something you would typically need to plan. You could take, periodic backpacks, as a matter of fact, that is an option, is an auxiliary recovery means. It's just that it's a bit more heavyweight. My battery's dying.
I think it's just your mic.
Oh, my mic's so low. So the clip stayed on, but the mic's off. I'll get that in there. So yeah, you could take a backpack or crate one, and then use that as a alternate recovery means. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, like a reverse migration. Backpacks are very flexible because you can even change the SQL version that you're targeting and things like that as well, as long as you're not using features that are not available versions and all. So again, going back to the point-in-time recovery, if I select let me get rid of that. So if I select my database, as you can see in the menu bar, there's this restore option. So in this context of a database, this restore will do a point-in-time recovery, using the latest, transaction log differentials and full backup that's available. And it suggests a timestamp name, which for this purpose I'll just take. And it also, gives you the option of, specifying the time you want to recover to. Let's see. So in this case here, I'll just, back up an hour or something, for demo here. Now, mind you, I can't change the target server. It has to be changed, it has to be the same logical server as the original. And I can, though, change the, the pricing tier if I so desire, which in this case here, just so I can. I'll go ahead and just bump that down to, standard edition or standard tier. And then just click OK. And that's, so now it's go ahead and are restoring the database, as you can see from the, the notifications there. But while that's running, let me go ahead and jump over to, let's see. Alrighty.
You said it had to be restored to a different database name, yet you didn't pick a different database name. Did it automatically pick one for you?
Yes. The suggested database name that it chose was the original database name plus a timestamp at the end of it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and I didn't change that, although I could have had I wanted to. And usually, if your purpose is to restore it back to the original name or the original database after it's done restoring, that's probably what you do because it's just a temporary name anyway. And then delete the original database and then do the rename magic. See if it's done yet. Yeah. Yeah, it typically takes about my experience, between 5 and 10 minutes to do the restore, depending on, all those factors that I mentioned earlier. But while that's running, let me go ahead and fire up a show you, basically how to do the same thing in PowerShell, which I think, as you can see, it'll have a couple of advantages and maybe a couple of disadvantages too, compared to a restore, using the portal. All right, so here's a PowerShell script that I created just to do a point-in-time restore. Because I'm, this is my own MSDN subscription, so I have to sign on. I don't know if you want to speak to this a little bit, Steve, but if you have Active Directory in Azure, you can also authenticate using that as well, and that'll be a little bit more seamless, I think, than this ugliness that I have to go through. Because at the end of the day, I'm prompted for my Azure login every time I do something, and that can get kind of inconvenient. So in a real enterprise situation, you'd probably have Active Directory doing that authentication. So the main thing I want to point out is that the advantage of doing it in PowerShell is that, well, first I get the, the source database that I want to restore, and then I just run a restore command. And in the restore commandlet, I can either say from point in time backup, or I can also do it from a deleted database backup, or I can do it from a geo-replicated backup. And the rest of the options are fairly similar, regardless of the method that you use. In this case here, I just, I specify what point in time I want to, restore to, which I had it, set up here in this, command. But the advantage of the PowerShell is really that this it will be synchronous, at least with this technique here. So you know exactly when it's done because, the script will finish. Whereas when you do it with the portal, you don't know if it's done or not, as you can, kind of see with my, portal with the, when I refreshed it, I just have to either refresh it here or, wait for the, the PowerShell notification, or I'm sorry, from the notification in the portal, and may or may not, be very, correct and current. So anyway, this is a PowerShell script. I'm wondering if I should go ahead and run this or not. Actually, I do have I'll fast forward time here because I do have an example of restoring from a deleted database back up in PowerShell too, which rather than actually playing it live, I'm going to just go ahead and run a PowerShell script here. At least I'll try to. That I had recorded earlier because this, if it takes like 7 minutes, I just didn't want you guys to waste your time. So anyway, this is really the same sort of script from a restore database backup. And as I mentioned, it's ugly because I have to sign on with my, my Azure, account in order to authenticate, and then before I can actually run the restore. But the actual restore itself, in this example here, I think took about 6 minutes, if I remember right. No, I take it back. This was probably about 7 minutes. I think this is the Geo Restore version of it. Really the only difference between those is that parameter that you can specify. In the case of Geo Restore, I can also restore to a different logical server, which I'm doing here by specifying my original logical server was STL SSUG. My new logical server is STL, show here, yeah, is STL, I think it's DR, if I remember right, yeah, STL SSUG DR. So anyway, I did cut out some of the time it took to do that, but after it did the restore, it shows what the restored database actually was. Go back over to the portal to see if that guy says it's done yet. Yeah, let's try it. Well, refresh it from Management Studio just because I like Management Studio, but I could do it in the portal too. Yay, finally. Ready. So anyway, as you can see, that took a couple of minutes. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but it is. The main thing is it does get you out of the jam when you have to restore. So the salient points are there's really 3 different recovery types. I showed you in the portal how to do the the point in time recovery. I just that's still running, at least it says it is. Hey, ready database using restore. So it was just a little late coming back on the portal notification. But if I want to restore from a deleted backup, the way I do that in the portal is I first select the logical server that I want to restore from. Let me close my notifications. And if I scroll down on the blade, I'll see that there's deleted databases available. And I've been playing around a lot, so there's going to be a lot of deleted databases out here. But it's really just the same sort of thing. I select one of the deleted database that I want to restore from. And some of these have the same name because I've been deleting and recreating with the same name, etc. But it still saves those deleted backups for me. So if I select this one, for example, it'll tell me what the restore point is, which was the time of the deletion. And all I have to do is click, select the new database name and click OK. And it'll go ahead and just restore that. It'll restore it back to the same server and all that. However, I cannot change the scale at this time. I have to do it post restore when restoring from a deleted database. And then, of course, there's also the geodatabase restore, which is actually done not by a restore, but it's actually done when you create a new database. So if I select a SQL instance, doesn't matter really which one here, and then I add a new SQL server, I can also select the backups during that process here. So I'll just go ahead and type some stuff. By the way, your server. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I want to create a backup, not a SQL instance. I forgot to mention it though, and it's a good time. Your server name has to be globally unique. In other words, it's a public DNS entry. So you need to choose a name that doesn't conflict with anybody else in the world that they've already chosen, with that it'll end in database.windows.net. Let's see. Anyway, when you add a new SQL database or create a new SQL database, that's the one that you can specify as a data source. You can specify from backup, and in this case here, that's what I'll select. And I'll see all my backups that are available when I click on the backup here. So it'll enumerate all the backups that I have in available here, and I can select one and then restore from that. And that would be really the geo backups, most likely, if the primary instance was not available at the time. The logical server, that is. All right, well, that's pretty much it on the backups and restores. It's pretty easy, but I do suggest that one become familiar with the PowerShell scripts to do backups and restores, in Azure. They definitely will be your friend in the case of your real day job where you have to restore a database. You don't want to be clicking around the portal when you have to do a restore. Just trust me.
So we're going to try to finish up here in about 15 minutes. We do want to talk about database migration. The rest of this deck is just fluff. But this is really what we kind of went through today with some challenges. And it's only because I was trying to present, that happens, never happened to me ever before. But today, the portal did agree with me in some of the spots. Before we talk about the data migration, like I said, we'll try to hit on that pretty quickly. Any questions? Again, those burning questions you guys have, because I'd hate for you to leave and sit through 2 hours of this and not actually, come away with what you want. Anybody, as you're walking through this, questions? It was that clear, huh? It was that clear. So nothing. Obviously, this isn't the same as doing SQL Server, on premises. It is different. There are going to be things you have to learn. And again, that's why getting over that first hump of just learning how to do it all is going to impact, am I really saving any money by doing this? Your first database, probably not. You're going to learn how to do it the first time. It's going to cost you extra. But remember that second slide I showed, all of that is available as far as cost savings when you start moving critical mass in entire instances up to Azure. So when it comes to data migration, do you think you'd be able to do that? Or you want me to? I can speak to it a bit if you want to chime in. Yep. So So we're going to cover taking an existing database and moving it to Azure. We see some of that. Quite honestly, we see a lot of new builds, people that are already in the business of doing ISV, kind of, you have a new client that came in, I'm going to go and run this DDL on an Azure instance, preload it with some data, and then go from there. We see a lot of that with Azure SQL Database. The tools for doing database migration are getting a lot better, but there is still a little bit of pain in that. Everything that you have on premises is not supported. I don't want to say everything is not supported. I'd say 99.9% of the surface area of T-SQL is supported, but does anybody use SQL Agent at all? Right, everybody, right? SQL Agent is not in SQL Azure databases, right? So you have to find different ways to schedule jobs. We have automation scripts, we have Azure runbooks. I mean, there's just other ways to do that. But if you're still using DB mail, or if you're using extended properties, and extended properties are valuable depending on what you're using them for, right? There's still some of those things that are just not supported in Azure SQL databases. Stay tuned for the rest of this calendar year. I think you're going to see some awesome stuff coming to Azure SQL database that I can't talk about, but it's getting better, right? But as of right now, those are things you have to consider. So maybe we'll walk through a little bit of a migration scenario. We have the Microsoft Migration Assistant. It'll do an assessment on an on-premises database and tell you basically anything that you need to know that may not be compatible with your with SQL Azure. As you go through that, I don't know how we would do it in a demo, but you're going to use something like SQL Package to package all of that database up into a backpack. You can't just take a backup from on-premises and then restore it to Azure. You have to actually create the backpack file that then bring it into Azure from that. So do you have a quick demo or?
Yeah, I'll try to go through pretty quickly.
Okay. Yep. Good. That'd be good.
All right. So the scenario. Sorry about that. The scenario here is taking an existing on-prem database that may or may not have features that are compatible with Azure, and then trying to move that up to the cloud. Yeah. Trying.
The wire.
Yeah, I was trying. These fancy contraptions. So there's a couple different ways you can create well, I should lead into it simply by saying the main way that one would do an on-prem migration will probably be a backpack. And a backpack is really a single file that contains both schema and data for the database that you want to import. So that's not to be confused with a DAC pack, which is just schema. So if you're using, how many here use the SQL Server data tools for development? And quite a few, good. So a lot of you are already familiar with DAC packs then, where you would keep your database under source control, so on and so forth. That really is a great facilitator to a migration, because with a database project and the corresponding DAC pack, it's pretty easy to make schema changes and remediate any features that are not available in Azure SQL database. One of those things, for example, are file groups. A lot of on-prem DBAs like to place files, indexes on separate stuff. Well, all the storage is extracted in Azure, so you really don't care. It's really just a matter of DTUs, and just let the Azure take care of spreading the load as needed. So what I did is I have an on-prem database, which is really just the demo, the worldwide importers, wide world importers, I should say, demo database that comes with. It's out there on GitHub. It's a nice sample SQL database. And all I did is take the data migration assistant. Hopefully I can find it here. I don't know if I saved it. There's a tool called Microsoft Data Migration Assistant, which is available for free download. The latest version, I believe, is 3.1. And with the Data Migration Assistant, it will try to tell you if there's any features when you point to a given database that are not available on the other platform that you're targeting. So here I'll just create a new one. And it has there's either an assessment or migration. Currently, this tool does not support a full migration, which is to say create a backpack. But what it does do is allow you to do a full assessment. So I select my source type is SQL Server, Azure SQL database is my target. Isn't that what was selected? Oops. I hit. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Azure SQL database. I have. Yeah, I think. And by the way, the older version of Azure SQL database, I don't know what it's called, but it was not V12. It was just the initial one. And this tool is specifically hard-coded to use Azure V12, which is the current version. Yeah, I don't know. Is the older one still supported?
No, everything's V12 now,
okay,
but right, you're using a service. We're not going to make a breaking change on you, so that's why we do you'll see sometimes versions there, and both of them are supported for a period of time, right? But anytime we have a major change or a major release, then we'll upgrade to anything new, and then allow you, a year or something to change it over.
Okay, what did I break there? Oh. Yeah, so I just need to check the database compatibility and feature parity. So okay, here's where it says V12 Azure SQL database. We're good there. Server name I'm connecting to is my local instance here, so I just put a little dot. Windows authentication. Don't care about that other stuff right now. Let's see. Yeah, I'll just go through this exercise. I'll not actually do the whole thing. Yeah, we're not going to have enough time, unfortunately. So all I did is select my on-prem database, and I click Start Assessment. So it's going to go through, both the feature parity and check for any compatibility issues. There's quite a few of them that are, especially like anything that deals with the server instance level stuff is probably not going to work in Azure. That's the biggest gotcha. I already mentioned file groups, and another feature that's not supported is the file stream feature. So this assessment tool flagged those two gotchas here. So I would have to fix this before I tried to move that database and create a backpack and export it to Azure. And of course you can save the report as well through this tool. So what I did, it was kind of difficult, but anyway, I did the default file group thing is pretty easy because it's pretty easy to change file groups. If you're thinking about this, hey, I'm creating a backpack. I don't necessarily have to remediate my physical database and move everything around. I just have to fix my database project at the end of the day for that, and then apply the changes. So that SQL Server data tools definitely facilitate that. So after I remediated, and this is a remediated version of it, is the wide world importers. Unless I broke something afterwards. I think I got rid of the default file group there. Okay, double check. Where's my storage? Whoops, that was the Azure version. No wonder. God. Well, afternoon here. Alrighty. Okay. So here, originally, this had the user data file group was the default. I just changed the primary file group to the default, and then I went through this exercise here, where within SQL Server, you can under tasks, this comes out here from Management Studio, you can essentially export it as a data tier application and it'll allow you to create a backpack, which is both schema and data. And one of the options, you can either save it to local disk or you can save it directly to an Azure storage account. And I already went through this exercise and actually did this, but I'll go through everything except the final one. So I just select my my storage account, the container, and the name of the file that I want to put out there, and then you know, click next. It's really no, I don't want to write down because it's a good one. I want to play with it later. So I'll just call this something else here. And then it, so what this will do is just create a backpack and put it out there in Azure. And then the complement of that is I can do the same thing on Azure, and just due to time constraints, I'm not going to really have time to either actually do that. But it's really just the you know, the complement of this process. Where what I would do on the Azure side, and this is something I would suggest that you do on a VM in Azure, not locally on your on-prem management studio, because all the data will get transferred, you know, in the process, pulled down to Azure and back if you're not careful. So at least that's the way it used to be. I assume it's still the same way. But to actually get the database into Azure, I just right-click and I import, you know, the data to your application, and I select my backpack, pretty much the same process as I did before. You know, again, this has to be a remediated database that you've already, what I would suggest that you actually do that from Visual Studio if you can, if you have those tools available, because it'll do a pretty thorough analysis if you change your target to SQL Azure database, and it'll catch all that stuff, and just in case something fell through the cracks on the migration. My experience, it tends to do a pretty good job. And then again, you just click through that, and it just goes through there, and you can select your you know, the size of your server as you would expect to do, like you're creating a new database. Of course, I don't want to, can't be an existing name, so. Yeah, I do have a, if I remember right, I do have a recording of going through this process too that'll be available in the artifacts of this presentation. We'll have the decks as well as the PowerShell scripts, SQL scripts, and I have some recordings of actually going through these exercises that, you know, take too long to do completely live on the demo sometimes. But essentially, that's all it's going to do. It's going to create a brand new database and, you know, get it out there to Azure. You know, it's not saying that's the only way to do it, but it's a way to do it. I mean, think about the same sort of problems you would have if you wanted to transfer a database that's currently on like SQL 2000 all the way up to 2016 or worse, vice versa. You know, there's a lot of features you might be using that are no longer available. So, you know, so just be mindful of that. But, you know, at least the tools, like Steve was saying, they are improving over time. And he has access to NDA information that I don't. So he knows what's coming. So hopefully the future will make this even easier, you know, going forward. But at a high level, that's kind of how you can take a you know, existing, you know, database that's on-prem, move it out to Azure. Probably the harder parts of that is re-architecting the application, because you don't want to just do a forklift of on-prem app out there. You want to think about what you're doing. You don't want your, for example, if you have a bunch of users connecting with Access to your on-prem database, you don't want to take that same application and just move it to Azure. You'd probably want to rethink the whole thing, you know, and maybe move to some more modern technologies like, you know, web-based architecture and various like Redis caching services and everything that's available in the cloud that you just didn't even have.
You're thinking like an architect. Architects would definitely re-architect things. Every manager in the room saying, I just want to lift and shift as lowest cost possible. Yeah. Right? So.
Well, I mean, that is a good point. You have to have those conversations. How much do you want to do to modernize your app in the process? You probably got a lot of technical debt that, you know, hey, do I want to just get it done fast? And, you know, I'll never have to pay the interest on that stuff. But in reality, you know, the sweet spot are new applications. Depending on how heavily you're using this legacy stuff, it may be quite a lift. Like Service Broker, for example, is not available. So if your application relies on SQL dependency, you know, for query notification changes to underlying data, you probably want to re-architect it. And that's a good opportunity to fix things, basically.
basically. So.
And I'll just say, stay tuned if you are interested at some point in lifting and shifting an entire instance as is, to the cloud. Keep an eye on the blogs, this year. I'm not saying next week or anything, but we're working on some stuff.
Cool.
So does the OS have to be the same? So if you are on Windows right now,
Windows 2003.
whatever, like 2010 or whatever,
Yeah.
can you move that to the Azure? Is there anything like Linux server or something? Then can you do some Windows?
Right now, especially when you talk about PaaS, platform as a service, we're managing the OS for you underneath the hood. So theoretically, it shouldn't even matter to you if it was running on Linux or Windows, because you're not going to pay a Windows license, for that in the cloud anyway, right? So we want to run it on the best platform we can run it on for SQL Server.
Does that mean you're running on Linux now?
No, it does not mean we're running on Linux. But Linux will be an awesome platform in Linux as well.
The bottom line is we don't know, really.
Yeah.
It's totally invisible.
Yep.
So any other questions about PaaS, Azure SQL Database?
What tools are available like just within different based on it? I don't see something.
Yep. Good question.
I'll answer part of that, and I'll let Steve chime in since he has his architect certification and I don't. Don't forget, you still have the same tools you have today, SSIS, but you have to do that instead of PaaS, you would do that on a VM. SSIS, of course, can suck data up. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of Azure Aware components now in the later versions of SSIS. So, that's definitely an option. It's not like you're going to throw all that stuff away. So you can still swap data around a lot of different ways. And then on top of that, when you think about things like Data Lake and USQL and all the other, newer type data management ETL technologies, then, it's a different world out there, and it be, how well that fits into the current stuff versus, in other words, you might do things differently if you were doing it from the ground up, new development, versus trying to just move an existing ETL out to the cloud. And you have to think about network bandwidth between your on-prem and Azure and, how big your pipe is and all those other complexities that go into the real world. Because, when, most people aren't going to have the luxury of having a 10 gigabit connection, between their on-prem and Azure. But some companies do, I think.
Yeah, you're definitely not going to replace hundreds of SSIS packages if that's what you're using and you don't want to re-architect, and you would stand up a VM, and still you're running a VM with an instance on it, and, with the license. But what you can do also is, depending if it's like transformation, you can use Azure Data Factory, which that is kind of, I don't like to say it's a ETL engine, it's more of a data orchestration engine. So if it's just about taking data out of this system or these, this FTP location and pushing it over here, doing some light transformations in that, Data Factory is the PaaS solution. And what's great about that is, that's really costing you like an enormous, 70 cents a month, to run a job. So it's an on-demand type of job service that you can run, 15-minute increments if you want to. But again, it's different. It's not SSIS. You're going to have to kind of learn the ins and outs of that tool, but it is a PaaS tool for me. I think there.
It was tying back to that, because we use SSIS with PaaS, and it's not that it sucks, but it drops connections constantly. And we were told that it's because there's not a special connection type that you have in SSIS to use the PaaS connections that you have to do with .NET. Like if you're connecting with .NET, there's special connectors. And so, is there going to be a solution to that?
That's interesting. I'd be more. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, ditto. So, with just out of curiosity, is that running in Azure? We're having or is that from on-prem?
We have the on-premise SSIS.
Oh, I got you. Oh, yeah. That's probably a bit more problematic because of the.
Well, it almost comes more network rules internally than somebody who somebody in Microsoft support tell you that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's just afterward. There's a BizTalk services in Azure as well. So it's not fully compliant with everything that you get on-prem, but there is BizTalk services. You can check that out. That's just a monthly operational cost.
So if I migrate to Azure now, it would be in 2016. So in 2 years or next year, I need that in 2020. So we're going to be forced to upgrade to versions or if it's just like a third-party app, you have to get qualifications to make sure that the app can run every version.
Right. So that's interesting, right? Because once you migrate to PaaS, there is no upgrade. You're not upgrading. Microsoft is now in control of your underlying upgrade. And honestly, for third-party apps, when you're running a vendor's application, they're getting better, right? But you're still, the question of are they going to certify that application to run on Azure SQL DB? I don't know. That's a good question, right? But yeah, we're going to constantly be doing that churn underneath the hood for you. And that's why when you see 2017 come out, for instance, that version of SQL is already what you've been running in SQL database probably for several months before the box product even came out. We've been upgrading SQL DB that entire time.
Yeah, there's currently features in the Azure T-SQL that are not available in SQL 2016 and won't probably. They will be available in VNext, like string ag and things like that. So it's definitely, what Steve's saying is 100% correct. It's basically a lot of cloud first, mentality in terms of the approach that Microsoft's taking for new features. So you're going to see it in Azure first, most likely.
Any other burning questions? Julie's got some amazing prizes. All right.
Sorry. Please fill out your evaluation, and then we'll do the ticket.
So thanks for having us. So next time maybe Mr. Nestor will be able to go through the attention. What's that? That stuff I couldn't talk about is stuff I can talk about. So.